Hi everyone, welcome to another GRE video. I'm Alice, and today we're going to be talking about something that is a bit difficult, which is that when you're talking about your Analyze an Issue essay and you've got your examples, how to actually incorporate those examples into your body paragraphs, into your writing, to make sure that they actually serve the purpose that they're supposed to. Now, that can be a huge pain, and it's really crucial that you get it right. So if you're interested in talking to me one-on-one to see if you're doing well, either through paid tutoring or through the 25 free minutes that I offer any new student, please go ahead and check the link in the description down below. But if not, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see more GRE writing examples and tips and other GRE studying videos. So let's get into it. If you have already come up with your examples, then continue on. If you haven't already, I will put the card to my other video about how to come up with examples right up there. So in order to make sure that you're using examples correctly, you really want to understand their purpose, what they're supposed to do, why even have them or why not, how they should fit into not only your argument, but the paragraph itself. So just to clarify, because people are often asking this question, is that technically examples are not needed. You don't have to have any examples in your paper in order to make an effective argument. However, almost every single paper, especially those that get 5s and 6s, have examples. The reason is because examples really help you illustrate what your point is and how that actually works in the real world. This is especially important if you're talking about the GRE questions, because most of them deal with issues like education or government or national identity or politics or something like that, which can be very theoretical, but you also have a lot of different practical examples to choose from. So that really is the purpose of having an example, is to make an argument. It always has to be related to the argument, and you don't want to go off on a tangent or introduce a bunch of details that don't have to do with exactly what you're talking about. If you do that, that's something that I like to call excessive speculation, and it really decreases the value of your paper. In order to avoid that, you really want to be direct. So tell the reader what the case is. Tell them enough detail to make sure they understand what you're talking about, and then make sure that you come back around and tie that example back into the point that you were trying to make. You really have to have all three of those things. So what the example is, why that illustrates what your point is, and then how that ties back to the argument that you're making. So those last two things seem a little bit difficult, which is why most people end up confusing telling what your point is and connecting it back to the original argument yourself. But I'll show you an example that does this very well. Now, when you're picking your example and you're making sure to describe it, you really want to make sure that your example perfectly describes what your point is. Now, this may not always be possible, because the reality of complex ideas is that they probably have some sort of nuance or something that makes that specific case really special. Now, when you're talking about writing the essay, particularly because it's timed and it's so detailed, is that you can really mold and bend your example to fit whatever point you're trying to make. So, for example, if there is information that might not exactly be what you want to say, or it might contradict your point just a little bit, feel free to leave out that detail, or feel free to change it up just a little bit for the purposes of the essay. Obviously, you never want to do this in real life or for an essay that you're turning in for an assignment, for example, but for the purposes of this essay, it's really more about how to use your examples rather than the quality of the examples themselves. You really want to think about how your argument might come across to somebody like a news anchor, for example. Their entire job is to read your example and make sure that it actually makes sense and to kind of poke holes into what your logical reasoning is. So for that reason, you really don't want to just use any example or use bad examples. You really want to make sure that any example you use fits your purpose, and if the truth doesn't, feel free to do a little bit of creative writing to make sure that it does. Now, another question that a lot of people ask too is how many examples should they use? For the most part, the most ideal is you would have at least one example for every single paragraph that you have. Most of the time, this is way too much to ask, and this is just not practical in terms of coming up with ideas and then also being able to write every single example. In general, I would say you need at least one, but up to 3 is pretty solid and very good. You definitely should have at least 1, maybe 2, and that is a perfectly fine essay that can get you a 5 or a 6, depending on how you use it. Now again, keep in mind that you really want your examples to illustrate your point very well, so feel free to come up with ideas and scrap them or change them as you go to make sure that they really fit whatever you're trying to argue. So as I mentioned before, you really want to write in at least 3 sentences. The first one to introduce your example and tell a little bit of background about what it is and what happens. Number 2, you want to relate it to the point that you're making. So if your argument, for example, is that schools should force students to take a variety of courses instead of just one, and you're using your own example, make sure that you tie it back to your point that you're making for that body paragraph. And then 3, you want to make sure that you tie the point that you're making back to your original point, back to the agree or disagree for the issue itself. So, for example, this illustrates the point because blank. Now, that ensures that your reader knows exactly what you're thinking and can really follow your stream of logic, and that they don't get lost in really vague details or really vague paragraphs that seem to introduce an example, but then really struggle to make the most of that example. And for the most part, it works very well if you introduce your point and you talk a little bit about the theory that you're thinking about and then introduce your example rather than putting your example first. Although in some cases, reversing that and putting your example first can work very well. Now, I want to show you an example, so let's take a look at this. Now, this is a really relatively short paragraph taken from the GRE webpage itself. If you go to ets.org and you search for the GRE section, they actually have a page dedicated to each of the essays, including every single prompt that you could possibly see, example essays, grading rubrics, and a bunch of really great information. And if you're looking for that, I'll leave the link in the description down below. But this paragraph says, the last example provides the most hope in how technology actually provides hope to the future of humanity. By increasing our reliance on technology, impossible goals can now be achieved. Consider how the late 20th century witnessed the complete elimination of smallpox. This disease had ravaged the human race since prehistorical days, and yet, with the technology of vaccines, free-thinking humans dared to imagine a world free of smallpox. Using technology, battle plans were drawn out, and smallpox was systematically targeted and eradicated. So you can see how here the author, the test taker, talks about what the example is, which is smallpox. This person ties smallpox back to the main point that this person's making, which is about impossible goals being achieved, and then it relates it back to how useful technology is, which is the main point of the essay. So this is something that you really need to practice and to make sure that you understand, because it is quite a difficult thing to do, but make sure you introduce the example, you explain the example, and then you tie it back to the point that you're trying to make. So try to be very explicit in all of those things. So hopefully this example was really helpful, and hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If you want to talk to me, again, the link to sign up is in the pinned comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you don't, and let me know if there's anything else that you want me to talk about in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!